The wagon wheels groaned against the hard-packed earth, a sound that had become as familiar to Eleanor as her own heartbeat. She walked behind the last wagon, her worn boots kicking up small clouds of red dust that clung to her dark skirt like rust on iron. The late afternoon sun painted the sagebrush gold, but she kept her eyes on the ground, counting steps to nowhere. Ahead, the Bickley wagon swayed with each rut and stone. Misses. Bickley's shrill laughter carried back on the wind, mixing with the deeper voices of the men discussing tomorrow's route. Eleanor adjusted the water bucket in her hand, its weight pulling at her shoulder. She'd been carrying it for 3 hours now, but no one had asked for a drink. "Girl, mister," Bickley's voice cracked like a whip. "Stop dragging your feet. We need to make camp before dark." Eleanor quickened her pace, though they both knew she hadn't been lagging. It was simply his way finding fault where none existed, reminding her of her place. She'd learned not to respond, not to meet his eyes. Silence was safer. The wagon train 12 families heading west to claim their piece of paradise had taken her on 3 weeks ago, not out of kindness, but necessity. Mrs. Bickley needed help with the washing and cooking, and Eleanor needed food and protection. It was a transaction. Nothing more. As the sun dipped lower, painting the clouds crimson, the lead wagon raised the signal to stop. The daily ritual began: men unhitching oxen, women gathering buffalo chips for fires, children racing between the wagons despite their mother's scolding. Eleanor watched it all from her place at the edge, neither part of it nor entirely separate. She began her evening tasks without being told. Water for the Bickleys' pot, their bedrolls laid out in the wagon, the iron spider placed over the fire pit she'd dug. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, while her mind wandered to places she couldn't name, places that might claim her as their own. "That one gives me the shivers," she heard Mrs. Patterson whisper to Mrs. Bickley. "That dark hair, that skin, she ain't natural. Orphan train trash." "Mrs. Bickley replied, not bothering to lower her voice. "But she works hard enough, and she don't eat much." Eleanor's hand stilled for a moment on the pot handle. Orphan train trash, 22 years old, and still carrying that label like a brand. She'd been 8 when they'd put her on that train in New York, promising a family would want her. 14 years of being passed from farm to farm, family to family, each one finding some reason to send her on. The fire crackled to life, and she set the pot to boil. Around her, the other fires bloomed like orange flowers in the gathering dusk. Families drew together, sharing their circles of light and warmth. She remained in the shadows between the Bickley wagon and their fire, visible enough to be called upon, invisible enough to be forgotten. As stars began to prick the darkening sky, Eleanor allowed herself to sit on a flat stone, her first rest since dawn. The vast emptiness of the prairie stretched in all directions, and for a moment, she felt herself dissolving into it. She was no more substantial than the smoke rising from the fires, no more permanent than the wagon tracks that wind and rain would soon erase. "I have no home," she whispered to the darkness, the words stolen by the wind as soon as they left her lips. It wasn't a lament anymore, just a fact, like saying the sky was blue or the earth was hard. Dinner was salt pork and beans, the same as every night. She served the Bickleys first, then took her portion, a half ladle of beans, a thumb-sized piece of pork to her stone. The food was hot and filling, and she was grateful for it. She'd known hunger intimate enough to never scorn a meal, no matter how meager. "Eleanor, Mrs." Bickley's voice cut through her thoughts. "The dishes won't wash themselves." She rose without complaint, gathering the tin plates and cups. The walk to the water barrel was 50 steps. She'd counted them every night, creating order in a world that offered her none. The water was murky but precious, carefully rationed for the journey ahead. As she scrubbed, she became aware of eyes on her. Not the suspicious glances of the wagon train women or the lingering looks of some of the men. This was different, a weight of attention that made the hair on her neck rise. She turned slowly, scanning the darkness beyond the circle of wagons. Nothing, just the endless prairie and the shadow of distant buttes against the stars. But the feeling persisted, a presence just beyond the reach of firelight. She finished the dishes quickly, her movements sharp and nervous. Spooked by shadows, she muttered to herself, but her hands trembled as she stacked the clean plates. The camp settled into sleep gradually, mothers herding children into wagons, men checking their rifles one last time, the fires banking down to glowing coals. Eleanor spread her thin blanket beneath the Bickley wagon. Her usual spot. The ground was hard and cold, but it was shelter of a sort. She lay on her back, looking up at the wagon's underside, listening to the Bickleys snoring above. Around her, the night sounds of the prairie emerged, the distant howl of coyotes, the rustle of small creatures in the sage, the endless whisper of wind through grass. And something else, a presence, patient and watching. She could feel it like heat from a distant fire, neither threatening nor comforting, simply there. Eleanor closed her eyes, willing sleep to come, but her mind kept circling back to that weight of attention. Who would watch a nobody, who would waste their time on orphan train trash with no name worth knowing and no place worth going? In the darkness beyond the wagon's circle, a figure shifted slightly, adjusting his position on the ridge. The Apache scout had been tracking this wagon train for 2 days, noting their patterns, their weaknesses, their dynamics. But tonight, his attention had been drawn to something unexpected, the solitary woman who moved like a shadow at the edges of their community. He'd seen outcasts before, plenty of them among his own people and the whites alike. But there was something different about this one. The way she held herself apart wasn't from pride or choice, but from a deeper understanding that she had no claim to belonging. It was a loneliness so complete it had become its own strength. The scout pulled back from the ridge, melting into the darkness. His band needed information about the wagon train's plans, their weapons, their destination, but as he made his way back to his horse, the image that stayed with him was of a woman sitting alone on a stone, whispering words to the wind that only the night could hear. Tomorrow would bring what it brought. The wagon train would continue west, following their dream of claimed land and new beginnings. The Apache would protect what was theirs, as they always had. And somewhere between these two forces, a woman with no home would continue walking, leaving footprints in the dust that belonged to no one and everyone at once. Eleanor finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, unaware that her whispered words had been heard, that her solitude had been witnessed. In her dreams, she was walking again, always walking. But for once, she wasn't alone. Someone walked beside her, matching her pace, sharing her silence. It was a comfort she wouldn't remember come morning, when Mrs. Bickley's sharp voice would start her moving again, one foot in front of the other, going nowhere and everywhere at once. The morning came with whispers and worried faces. Eleanor woke to find the men clustered near the lead wagon, their voices low and urgent. "Mr." Bickley stood among them, his rifle cradled in his arms like a child. "3 horses gone," she heard someone say, "taken clean in the night." "Apache." Another man spat the word like a curse. "They've been tracking us." Eleanor rose quietly, folding her blanket with careful precision. The air tasted of dust and fear, a combination that made her stomach tight. She began her morning tasks, stirring the coals back to life, setting water to heat while keeping her ears open to the men's discussion. "We push hard today." The wagon master, a weathered man named Garrett, decided, "Make for Willow Creek by nightfall. There's a trading post there, some protection." The camp erupted into hurried activity. Women packed with sharp efficiency. Children were hustled into wagons without breakfast. Men checked and rechecked their weapons. Eleanor worked in silence, loading the Bickley wagon while Mrs. Bickley fretted over her china, wrapped in quilts. "Savages," the woman muttered. "We should have taken the northern route." By full sunrise, they were moving, The pace was punishing, the oxen lowing in protest as they were pushed beyond their usual steady plod. Eleanor walked faster too, her legs burning with the effort. The dust was worse today, kicked up by the hurried wagons, coating everything in a fine red film. At midday, they didn't stop. People ate cold biscuits while walking, drank water sparingly from canteens. The sun blazed overhead, turning the prairie into a shimmering hell of heat waves and mirages. Eleanor's lips cracked, her throat burned, but she didn't ask for water. The Bickleys' supply was their own. It happened just as the sun reached its peak. The attack came from the south, sudden as a thunderclap. Riders appeared from a draw no one had noticed, moving fast and low on their painted horses. The wagon train tried to circle, but there wasn't time. The riders swept through like wind, targeting the horses, cutting loose the oxen, slashing water barrels. Eleanor found herself pressed against the Bickley wagon. Misses. Bickley screaming somewhere behind her. Dust and chaos swirled around them. She saw a rider lean from his horse to cut the traces on the Garrett wagon. Saw another drive off 3 oxen with whooping cries. A shot rang out, then another. The men were firing, but the riders were already pulling back. Their objective accomplished. It had lasted maybe 3 minutes, but the damage was devastating. "My wagon, mister!" Bickley's voice rose above the confusion. Eleanor turned to see their wagon tilted at a crazy angle. One wheel broken, their possessions spilling onto the ground. Misses! Bickley sat in the dirt, her precious china scattered around her in glittering shards. The aftermath was worse than the attack. 3 wagons disabled, most of the spare horses gone. Water supplies compromised. Families who'd been confident that morning now faced the brutal mathematics of survival. Some wagons would have to be abandoned. Some people would have to walk. Some possessions would have to be left behind. "We can't take her, Mr." Bickley's voice was flat, final. He was talking to the wagon master, but his eyes were on Eleanor. "We've got to double up with the Pattersons. There's no room." "She's your help," Garrett said, though his tone suggested he already knew this was a lost argument. "She was," Bickley corrected. "We can't feed what we can't carry." Eleanor stood very still, understanding washing over her like cold water. Around her, similar calculations were being made. The Hendersons were leaving behind their grandmother's rocking chair. The Youngs were abandoning a plow, and the Bickleys were abandoning her. "But surely, Mrs." Patterson began, then stopped. Her wagon was already overloaded with the Bickleys' salvaged goods. There was no room for charity. "Someone else can take her," Mrs. Bickley said, not meeting Eleanor's eyes. But no one volunteered. Eleanor watched as the families reorganized, redistributed, closed ranks. She stood with her small bundle of possessions, a change of clothes, a comb, a small knife, and watched herself become invisible. "I'm sorry," Garrett said quietly, and she believed he meant it. "We'll leave you what water we can spare. Maybe you can make it back to Fort Laramie." Fort Laramie was 5 days behind them, with little water, no food, on foot. It might as well have been on the moon. She didn't protest. What was the point? She'd known. Hadn't she known from the moment the Bickleys took her on that this was temporary, that she was disposable? She watched as they filled a single canteen for her, left her a handful of hardtack biscuits, payment for 3 weeks of labor. The wagons rolled away in a cloud of dust, moving faster now, lighter, freed from unnecessary weight. A few people looked back. She saw young Timothy Patterson wave until his mother pulled him inside the wagon, but most didn't. She was already part of the past, a story they'd tell someday about the harsh choices the frontier demanded. Eleanor stood in the emptiness they left behind, surrounded by the detritus of abandonment, broken wheels, scattered belongings too heavy to carry, the ashes of morning fires. The silence was complete, vast as the sky above. She was alone, truly, finally, absolutely alone. She allowed herself one moment of despair. one moment to feel the full weight of her abandonment. Then she straightened her shoulders and began to walk. Not back toward Fort Laramie, she knew she'd never make it, but toward a line of rocks she could see to the north. Shelter. Maybe shade, if nothing else. The first day was bearable. She found shade in the rocks, rationed her water to tiny sips, ignored the gnawing in her stomach. She'd been hungry before. This was just another test, another survival. The second day was harder. The sun seemed closer, heavier, pressing down on her like a hand. Her lips split and bled. Her vision swam. She finished half the water, knowing she should save more, but unable to resist the desperate need of her throat. By the third day, she was stumbling. The rocks provided shade but no water, no food. She watched buzzards circling overhead with detached interest. They were patient. Those birds, they knew how this story ended. She fell beside a boulder as the sun reached its zenith, her legs simply refusing to carry her further. The stone was hot against her back, but she lacked the strength to move. Her canteen held perhaps 2 swallows of water. She saved them, though she couldn't have said why. What was she saving them for? "I have no home," she whispered again. But this time the words came out cracked and broken. The wind didn't even bother to steal them. She closed her eyes, drifting in and out of consciousness. Time became fluid, meaningless. Was it still the third day? The fourth? Did it matter? Through her delirium, she heard something. Footsteps, quiet, careful, deliberate. Not the random movement of an animal, but the purposeful approach of a human. Eleanor tried to open her eyes, but they felt weighted with sand. A shadow fell across her face, blocking the sun. Blessed coolness. She managed to crack her eyes open, seeing a figure backlit by the harsh light. Dark hair, dark skin, clothes she didn't recognize. One of them, her mind supplied hazily. The Apache who'd driven off the horses, destroyed the wagons, left her here to die. "Please," she whispered, though she didn't know what she was asking for. Mercy, death, psalm. The figure knelt beside her. She felt water on her lips, not her carefully hoarded supply, but fresh, cool water from a different source. She drank instinctively, desperately, until the container was pulled away. "Slow," a voice said. Male, young, speaking English with an accent she'd never heard before. "Too fast will make sick." More water. Controlled sips this time. Life flowed back into her body with each swallow. Her vision cleared enough to see her rescuer properly. He was perhaps 25, with sharp cheekbones and dark eyes that studied her with careful intelligence. His clothes were a mix of cloth and leather, practical and worn. A knife hung at his belt, but his hands were gentle as they helped her sit up. "You are alone," he said. It wasn't a question. "They left me," Eleanor managed. "After the raid, no room." Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise, but perhaps recognition. He'd seen this before. Maybe the harsh mathematics of survival, the easy abandonment of the unwanted. "Can you stand?" She tried, but her legs buckled. He caught her easily, his arm steady around her waist. She should have been afraid. She thought distantly. This man was the enemy, the savage, the threat. But fear required energy she didn't have. And besides, what did she have left to lose? "You cannot stay here," he said. "You will die." "Yes," she agreed simply. He was quiet for a moment, seeming to weigh something in his mind. Then he whistled, sharp and clear. A horse appeared from behind the rocks, a painted mare with intelligent eyes. The man lifted Eleanor onto the horse's back as if she weighed nothing, then swung up behind her. "Where?" she asked, the single word all she could manage. "Safe," he replied. "For now." As they rode away from the rocks, Eleanor's head lolling against the stranger's shoulder, she thought she should ask more questions. Who was he? Where were they going? What would happen to her? But the questions seemed to require too much effort. And besides, did it matter? She'd already been nowhere, belonged to no one. Whatever came next couldn't be worse than that. The horse's gait was smooth, rhythmic. The man's arm around her waist kept her from falling. For the first time in 3 days, maybe for the first time in years, Eleanor let herself be carried. Let someone else decide the direction. She was too tired to be afraid, too broken to resist. As consciousness faded again, she heard him speak, though she couldn't tell if he was talking to her or to himself. "They throw away their own people," he said, and there was something in his voice she recognized. Not sympathy exactly, but understanding. Like broken tools. Yes, Eleanor thought as darkness claimed her. That's exactly what I am. A broken tool, discarded when no longer useful. But even broken tools could sometimes be mended, in the right hands. The last thing she remembered was the steady beat of the horse's hooves and the strange comfort of being held by someone who'd bothered to stop, to look, to see her as more than just another piece of prairie debris. Enemy or not, he'd given her water. Enemy or not, he'd kept her from falling. For now, that was enough. Eleanor woke to the sound of water running over stones. For a moment, she thought she was dreaming. She'd dreamed of water so many times in the past days. But the sound persisted, real and close. She opened her eyes to find herself lying on a bed of pine needles beneath a rough lean-to shelter. Drink. The same voice from before, the man who'd found her. He knelt beside her, offering a gourd filled with water. This time, she drank slowly, having learned her lesson. The water was sweet and cold, better than anything she'd ever tasted. "Thank you," she whispered when she'd finished. He nodded, sitting back on his heels to study her. In the filtered sunlight through the pine branches, she could see him more clearly. His name, he'd told her as they rode, was Samuel, an English name that sat strangely on him, like clothes that didn't quite fit. "Your people," he said. "They will not come back." "They weren't my people." The words came out more bitter than she'd intended. "I was hired help. Less than that, really." Samuel was quiet for a moment. Then he rose, moving to a small fire she hadn't noticed before. He returned with a piece of dried meat, offering it to her. "Eat slow." The meat was tough, seasoned with something she didn't recognize, but her body craved it desperately. She forced herself to take small bites, to chew thoroughly. Samuel watched her with those careful eyes, seeming to catalog every movement. "Why?" she finally asked. "Why help me?" He shrugged, a gesture so normal, so human, that it startled her. "You are dying." "That's not an answer." "It is enough answer." They sat in silence while she ate. Around them, the small camp revealed itself in details, a second lean-to further back in the trees. Supplies wrapped in hide, weapons leaning against a pine trunk. This wasn't his home, she realized. This was just a temporary stop, a way station. "You cannot stay here," Samuel said, as if reading her thoughts. "My people come soon. They will not—" He paused, searching for words. "They will not understand." Understand what? Why I brought white woman to camp. The reality of her situation crystallized. She was alone with an Apache warrior, miles from any settlement, completely dependent on his goodwill. She should have been terrified. Instead, she felt only a tired curiosity about what would come next. "Then what happens to me?" Samuel stood, pacing to the edge of the shelter and back. She could see him wrestling with something, some decision that sat heavy on his shoulders. "Finally!" He stopped, turning to face her. "You come with me, to my people. They decide." "Decide if I live or die." "Decide if you stay or go." It wasn't much of a choice. But then, when had she ever had real choices? Eleanor struggled to her feet, pleased when her legs held. "When? Now. They are close." He helped her onto his horse again, and they rode deeper into the canyon. The landscape changed from prairie to pine forest, from open sky to dappled shade. Eleanor had never seen country like this, so different from the endless grasslands she'd walked for weeks. They smelled the camp before they saw it smoke. Cooking meat, the earthier scent of horses and leather. Samuel made a call like a bird's cry, and an answer came back. Then they were through the trees and into a clearing where perhaps 30 people had made their temporary home. Everything stopped. Women at their work, children at their play. Men tending weapons all turned to stare at the Apache warrior bringing a white woman into their midst. Eleanor felt their eyes like physical weight, judging, questioning, deciding. An older man approached, his face weathered but his bearing strong. He spoke to Samuel in their language, the words rapid and sharp. Samuel responded, his tone respectful but firm. Eleanor caught her own name, or what Samuel had decided to call her simply, the woman. You? The older man turned to her, speaking English with more fluency than Samuel. Why are you here? He saved me, Eleanor said simply. I was dying. Your people left you. Yes. Why? How to explain a lifetime of not belonging? I was extra weight. After the raid, after your people took the horses, there wasn't room for extra weight. The man's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. He turned back to Samuel, and they spoke at length. Other members of the band drew closer, particularly the women, studying Eleanor with expressions ranging from curiosity to open hostility. One woman, perhaps 40 years old, with streaks of gray in her black hair, approached boldly. She walked around Eleanor in a slow circle, occasionally reaching out to touch her dress, her hair, her skin. Eleanor stood still, understanding this was some kind of test. The woman said something to Samuel that made him frown. They exchanged words, the woman's tone mocking, Samuel's defensive. Finally, the woman laughed not a kind sound and walked away. She says you are too weak, Samuel translated. Says you will die anyway. Why waste food? Maybe she's right. Samuel looked at her sharply. You want to die? No. Eleanor was surprised to find she meant it. No, I want to live. I don't know how to convince anyone I'm worth keeping alive. The older man, who Eleanor learned was called Joseph, another English name. Another mystery made a decision. She could stay, for now. She would work, earn her food, prove her worth. If she couldn't, or if she caused trouble, she would be sent away. Sent where? Eleanor asked. Joseph shrugged. That is not our concern. And so began her time among the Apache. Samuel showed her where she could sleep a space at the edge of the women's area, marked by suspicious glances and wide berths. He taught her basic tasks, how to gather wood without disturbing the forest floor, how to scrape hides without tearing them, how to tend the fire without creating too much smoke. The work was hard, harder than anything the Bickleys had demanded. Her soft hands blistered, then bled, then slowly began to callous. Her back ached from constant bending. Her arms burned from carrying water up from the stream. But she didn't complain. Complaint was luxury she couldn't afford. The women watched her constantly, waiting for her to fail. When she struggled with the hide scraper, no one showed her the proper grip. When she couldn't understand their instructions, no one translated. Only Samuel helped, and only when others weren't watching. Why do you care? She asked him one evening, as he showed her how to mend a torn moccasin with sinew. I brought you here. You are my... He paused, searching for the word. Responsibility. That's all. He looked at her, and for a moment his careful mask slipped. You know what it is like, to not belong. You belong here. Do I? He held up his hands. Samuel, English name, given by mission school, taken from my people when I was young, taught white ways, then sent back, not white, not fully Apache anymore. I live between... Eleanor understood then. He'd saved her because he recognized something in her abandonment, something that echoed his own displacement. They were both caught between worlds, neither here nor there. A child's cry interrupted the moment. One of the boys had fallen, scraped his knee badly. Without thinking, Eleanor went to him. She cleaned the wound with water, tore a strip from her petticoat to bind it. The boy, perhaps 6 years old, watched her with huge dark eyes, tears drying on his cheeks. When she finished, she looked up to find the entire camp watching. The boy's mother stood frozen, torn between grabbing her child and acknowledging the help. Finally, she nodded just barely and led the boy away. "That was good," Samuel said quietly. "They see you help their children. They see you different." Days passed in this pattern. Work from dawn to dusk. Suspicious watching. Small moments of almost acceptance. Eleanor learned a few words in Apache water. Fire, food. Thank you. She learned to read the moods of the camp. When to be visible and when to disappear. One evening, a hunting party returned with a deer. Eleanor watched the efficient butchering, the careful distribution of meat, the use of every part of the animal. When a piece of meat was offered to her small, but offered nonetheless, she understood it was another test. She ate it slowly, respectfully, the way she'd seen others do. When she finished, she said thank you in Apache. The woman who'd given it to her, the same one who'd called her too weak, almost smiled. That night, as Eleanor lay on her bed of pine needles, she realized something had shifted. She wasn't accepted, might never be fully accepted, but she was no longer completely outside. She had a place, however tenuous. She had work that mattered. She had someone who ensured she ate, who taught her what she needed to know. "You are stronger than you look," Samuel told her the next morning, watching her haul water up the steep path without stopping to rest. "I've had to be good. Strong is necessary here." Eleanor set down the water jug and looked at him. Really looked at him. This man who'd pulled her back from death, who protected her among his people despite the cost to himself. What happens when your band moves on? You come. Just like that. You have somewhere else to go. She laughed, surprising herself with the sound. "No, I suppose I don't." "Then you come. You learn, maybe someday." He paused. "Maybe someday what?" "Maybe someday you find where you belong." Eleanor thought about that as she returned to work. Belonging. Such a simple word for such a complex thing. She'd spent 22 years looking for it, being rejected by it, learning to live without it. And now, in the most unlikely place, among people she'd been taught to fear, she was being offered the smallest taste of it. It wasn't home, not yet, maybe not ever, but it was something, a place to sleep, work to do, people who at least acknowledged her existence, and Samuel, who looked at her and saw not orphan train trash or extra weight, but simply a person who needed help. As the sun set behind the pines, painting the camp in gold and shadow, Eleanor allowed herself a dangerous thought. Maybe she could stay. Maybe she could learn their ways, earn their trust, find some small corner of their world to claim as her own. It was a fragile hope, easily crushed. But for now, for tonight, it was enough. The valley opened before them like a cupped palm, sheltered by red rock walls and fed by a clear stream that whispered over smooth stones. Eleanor had been with the band for 2 weeks now, and this was their third camp, each one chosen for water, shelter, and strategic position. She was learning to see the land as they did not as empty wilderness, but as a living map of resources and dangers. The smoke from morning fires rose straight in the still air, carrying the scent of roasting corn and venison. Women ground corn on flat stones, the rhythm of their work steady as heartbeat. Children ran between the temporary shelters, their laughter mixing with the nickering of horses grazing near the stream. It was a scene of such ordinary domesticity that Eleanor sometimes forgot she was living among people her own kind called savage. "Here," Samuel said, handing her a water gourd. "Take to Maria." Maria was the woman who'd first called Eleanor too weak. Over the past days, she'd become less hostile, though still watchful. She was working on a beautiful basket, weaving patterns Eleanor couldn't follow despite watching carefully. "Thank you," Maria said in English, surprising Eleanor. It was the first English word she'd spoken directly to her. Eleanor settled nearby, not close enough to presume friendship, but near enough to watch. Her own hands were busy with simpler work, scraping the last bits of flesh from a rabbit hide. The repetitive motion had become almost meditative. A shadow fell across her work. She looked up to find another warrior standing over her, Thomas. They called him, though she suspected that wasn't his real name either. He was younger than Samuel, perhaps 20, with a scar across his jaw that pulled his mouth into a permanent half-sneer. He spoke to her in Apache, his tone mocking. Eleanor caught perhaps one word in 3, but his meaning was clear enough. She was unwelcome, unwanted, a burden. "I work," she said in her limited Apache. "I earn my food." Thomas laughed, not kindly, and said something that made Maria look up sharply. The older woman snapped at him, her tone protective in a way that surprised Eleanor. Thomas argued back, gesturing at Eleanor with obvious disgust. Samuel appeared as if from nowhere, inserting himself between Thomas and Eleanor. The two men faced each other, tension crackling between them like lightning before a storm. Samuel spoke quietly, but there was steel in his voice. Thomas replied with heat, his hand moving to the knife at his belt. "Enough." Joseph's voice cut through the confrontation. The elder had been watching from his place by the main fire. He spoke at length, his tone carrying the weight of authority. Thomas backed down, though his eyes promised this wasn't over. He stalked away, and Samuel relaxed slightly. "What did he want?" Eleanor asked. "Nothing important," Samuel said, but she could see the lie in the tightness around his eyes. That evening, she learned the truth. Thomas's brother had been killed in a skirmish with soldiers 6 months ago. To him, every white face was the enemy, every white presence a reminder of loss. Eleanor understood how could she not loss was a language she spoke fluently. The next morning brought a new lesson. Samuel led her to where the horses grazed, selecting a mild-mannered mare with a white blaze on her face. "You learn to ride properly," he announced. "I can ride." "You can sit on horse while it walks. Not the same." He was right. What Eleanor had learned perching on farm horses, clinging to saddle horns, bore little resemblance to the fluid unity these people achieved with their mounts. Samuel started with the basics, how to approach the horse, how to breathe with it, how to feel its mood through her legs and hands. "Horse is not tool," he explained, his hand on the mare's neck. "Horse is partner. You must trust, and horse must trust you." Eleanor placed her palm against the warm neck, feeling the pulse beneath the skin. The mare turned her head, dark eyes studying this strange new person. Slowly, Eleanor breathed out, letting her shoulders drop, letting go of the perpetual tension she carried. The mare's ear flicked forward interest, maybe acceptance. "Good," Samuel said. "Now, mount." Without a saddle. Mounting was an exercise in humiliation. Eleanor slipped, fell, spooked the horse, fell again. Children gathered to watch, giggling behind their hands. But she kept trying, and eventually managed to swing herself up, albeit gracefully. "Now," Samuel said, swinging up onto his own horse with enviable ease. "We ride." They started slowly, walking the horses in circles while Eleanor learned to grip with her knees, to move with the animal rather than against it. Her thighs burned, her back ached, but she didn't complain. Samuel was patient but demanding, correcting her posture, her hands, her balance. As the sun climbed higher, they ventured beyond the camp, following a deer trail up the valley wall. From the height, Eleanor could see the entire camp spread below, so small, so temporary, yet containing an entire world of relationships and rivalries, work and rest, tradition and change. "Your people," she said. They've lived like this always. Not always. Land changes. We change, adapt or die. And now, with the settlers, the soldiers. Samuel's face darkened. Now we adapt again, but some changes. He trailed off, looking toward the horizon where, somewhere beyond sight, wagon trains and forts and towns were sprawling across land that had once known only wind and buffalo. They returned to find the camp in subdued celebration. The hunters had brought back not just meat, but news a wagon train had been spotted 2 days to the east, heading for the pass. There would be no raid, Joseph had decided. Too risky, too close to the fort. But the information was noted, filed away. Eleanor felt the weight of eyes on her during the discussion. She was still the outsider, the face of the enemy. No matter how hard she worked or how well she began to ride, the line between her and them was drawn in blood and history, not easily erased. That night, she sat at the edge of the firelight, close enough to feel the warmth, but not so close as to presume inclusion. She was mending a torn legging, her fingers working automatically while her mind wandered. "You are sad." She looked up to find a child watching her, the same boy whose knee she'd bandaged. His name was James, another mission school name that seemed to be common here. "Not sad," she said carefully, thinking. "About what?" "About home." "Where is your home?" Eleanor set down her sewing. How to explain to a child that home was a concept she'd never quite grasped? "I don't know." James seemed to consider this seriously. Then he pointed to the ground beneath them. "This is home now." "Is it?" He nodded with the certainty only children possess. "You are here. We are here. So this is home." Before she could respond, his mother called him away. But his simple words echoed in Eleanor's mind. Was it really that easy? Could home be wherever you happened to be, as long as you weren't alone? Later, Samuel found her still sitting there, the mending forgotten in her lap. "The boy is right," he said. "Home is not a place. It is people who see you. Your people don't see me, not really. They see you more each day. Maria taught you her word for thank you. Joseph nods when you pass. The children no longer run from you. And Thomas wants me gone. Thomas wants many things he cannot have. His brother back, the white people gone, the old ways unchanged. He must learn, as we all must learn, to live with what is, not what was." Eleanor looked at him in the dying firelight. His face was painted in shadows and gold, familiar now in a way that surprised her. When had this stranger become the person she trusted most? "Why do you care what happens to me?" she asked, the question that had haunted her for weeks. Samuel was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "First time I saw you, walking behind those wagons, I recognized something. You were there, but not there. Present, but not seen. I know this feeling." "And that was enough to save me?" "No." He turned to look at her directly. "I saved you because leaving you to die would make me like them. The people who threw you away, I choose to be different." The weight of his words settled between them. Eleanor felt something shift in her chest, a loosening of a knot she'd carried so long she'd forgotten it was there. Not love, not yet, but recognition, understanding, the beginning of trust. A coyote howled in the distance, and others answered, their voices weaving together in a wild harmony. The camp settled into sleep around them, but Eleanor and Samuel remained by the dying fire, not speaking but not alone. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to human struggles, but somehow their cold light seemed less distant tonight. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Thomas's hostility, the endless work, the uncertainty of her position. But tonight, she had this a place by a fire, someone who saw her truly, and the possibility that home might not be a place she had to find, but something she could build, one small trust at a time. "Teach me more words," she said finally. "I want to understand when Maria tells stories." Samuel smiled. the expression transforming his usually serious face. First word, Nijoni. It means beautiful, but also balanced, in harmony. Nijoni, Eleanor repeated, tasting the unfamiliar sounds. Good. Next word, Goyal. It means dawn, new beginning. She repeated this too, and he corrected her pronunciation gently. They continued until the fire was just embers and Eleanor's mind was full of new words, new concepts, new ways of seeing the world. When she finally went to her sleeping place, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years' anticipation for tomorrow. Not because tomorrow would be easy or safe, but because tomorrow she would learn something new, understand a little more, belong a little better. The mare she'd ridden that day nickered softly as she passed, and Eleanor stopped to stroke the white blaze on her face. Nijoni, she whispered to the horse. Beautiful, balanced, in harmony. Perhaps, with time and patience and trust, she could become that too. The scouts returned at midday with news that changed everything. Eleanor was grinding corn with Maria when the riders thundered into camp, their horses lathered with sweat. She didn't need to understand all the rapid Apache words to grasp the urgency their gestures toward the east, the way Joseph's face hardened, the immediate gathering of warriors. "What is it?" she asked Samuel when he passed, already reaching for his rifle. "Settlers, building on the sacred spring, 2 valleys over." His jaw was tight with controlled anger. "They cut the old trees, the ones that mark our ancestors' council ground." Eleanor's stomach dropped. She knew those settlers, or at least, she knew their kind. Families like the Bickleys, convinced that empty land was unclaimed land, that their papers from some distant office gave them rights to places that had been used for generations. The war council formed quickly. Joseph sat at the center, with the senior warriors around him. Thomas was there, speaking hotly, gesturing sharply. Others added their voices, some calling for immediate action, others for caution. The fort was only 3 days away. Soldiers could come. Eleanor stayed at the edge of camp, trying to make herself invisible, but she could feel the shift in atmosphere. Children were quieter. Women worked with one eye on the horizon. The easy rhythm of daily life had been replaced by tense preparation. Then Thomas stood and pointed directly at her. His voice carried across the camp, and though she couldn't understand every word, his meaning was clear. The white woman. The spy. How convenient that settlers appeared so close to their camp after they'd taken her in. "No," Samuel said sharply. But Thomas continued, his accusations gaining momentum. Others began to look at Eleanor with renewed suspicion. Even Maria's face had closed off, uncertainty replacing the fragile warmth that had been growing. Joseph raised his hand for silence. He spoke directly to Eleanor in English. "The settlers. You know them?" "No," she said, then hesitated. "But I might know people like them from the wagon train." "They would recognize you." She nodded slowly. "Some might." Thomas erupted again, but Joseph silenced him with a look. The old leader was thinking, weighing options Eleanor couldn't begin to understand. "You will come with us," Joseph decided. "You will speak to them. Tell them to leave." "They won't listen to me," Eleanor said. "I'm nobody to them, less than nobody." "Then you will try anyway." It wasn't a request. Eleanor understood she was being tested again, but this time the stakes were higher. If she refused, or if she was seen to side with the settlers, whatever fragile place she'd earned would be destroyed. But if she went, if the settlers recognized her, saw her with the Apache, "I'll go," she said. The war party prepared quickly. 20 warriors, painted and armed, their face transformed into masks of fierce purpose. Eleanor was given different clothes, a worn dress they'd taken in some previous raid. Something that would make her look more like a captive than a willing companion. Samuel stayed close to her as they mounted. "You don't have to speak for us," he said quietly. "Just translate. Make them understand. And if they don't, His silence was answer enough. They rode hard through the afternoon, following trails Eleanor couldn't see but the Apache knew like heartbeats. As they drew closer, she began to recognize signs of settlement tree stumps where forest had been cleared, the parallel ruts of wagon wheels, the alien straightness of cut lumber against the organic curves of the landscape. The sacred spring, when they reached it, made Eleanor's heart sink. What had once been a grove of ancient cottonwoods was now a muddy clearing. Several trees lay fallen, their massive trunks already sectioned for building. A half-built cabin sat near the water, and nearby, a family worked at various tasks. Eleanor recognized them with a jolt. The Wheelers. They'd been 3 wagons ahead of the Bickleys in the train. She saw Mr. Wheeler with his distinctive red beard, Mrs. Wheeler hanging washing, their 3 children playing in the dirt. They'd been kind enough, as settlers went. They'd even given her water once when Mrs. Bickley wasn't looking. The Apache spread out, still hidden in the remaining trees. Joseph nodded to Eleanor. This was her moment. She rode forward slowly, Samuel beside her but hanging back enough to seem like a guard rather than a companion. Her heart hammered as she entered the clearing. Young Tom Wheeler saw her first. His mouth fell open, and he called out, "Ma, it's that girl from the wagon train." The Wheelers turned. Mr. Wheeler's hand going immediately to the pistol at his hip. His eyes took in Eleanor's appearance. Samuel behind her. The suggestion of more figures in the trees. "Eleanor, Mrs." Wheeler said uncertainly. "We heard that you didn't make it." "I survived," Eleanor said simply. "But you need to leave this place." "Mr." Wheeler's face hardened. "Now see here, girl. This is our land. We've got papers." "Your papers mean nothing here." Eleanor interrupted. "This is sacred ground. Those trees you cut were council markers. The spring." "Savage nonsense!" Wheeler spat. "You've been with them too long. Girl gone native." Eleanor tried again. "Please, I'm trying to help you. If you leave now, peacefully, no one gets hurt. But this place, you can't stay here." "We can and we will." Wheeler drew his pistol, though he didn't quite aim it. "We've got rights. The government." "The government is 3 days away," Eleanor said. "The Apache are here now, and there are more of them than you can see." As if to emphasize her point, Thomas emerged from the trees, then another warrior, then another. They didn't approach, just stood at the tree line, weapons visible. The Wheeler children clustered around their mother's skirts. "Please," Eleanor said again, looking directly at Mrs. Wheeler. "You have children. Think of them. Don't you threaten our children." "Mr. Wheeler snarled. "I'm not threatening anyone. I'm trying to prevent—" Her words were cut off by a gunshot. Wheeler had fired into the air, probably trying to summon help or scare off the Apache. The response was immediate. Arrows whistled from the trees, studding the ground around the cabin. Not aimed to kill. Not yet, but the message was clear. "Mrs." Wheeler screamed, gathering her children. "Mr." Wheeler raised his pistol toward the trees, and Eleanor knew that if he fired again, if he actually aimed at someone, the restraint would end. Without thinking, she dismounted and walked directly between Wheeler and the Apache, her hands raised. "Stop!" she called out in both languages. "Please, stop!" For a moment, everything hung suspended. She could feel Samuel's tension behind her, the Apache warrior's fingers on bowstrings, Wheeler's finger on the trigger. "You have 1 hour," she said to Wheeler, her voice steadier than she felt. "Pack what you can carry, leave the buildings, go back to the fort or the town or wherever, but leave this place." "You can't—" "1 hour," she repeated. "After that, I can't stop what happens." "Mrs." Wheeler was already moving, throwing essentials into a wagon. She understood, even if her husband didn't. That pride wasn't worth dying for. She grabbed her husband's arm. hissed something in his ear. His face was red with rage, but he lowered the pistol. "This isn't over," he said. "The army will hear about this. They'll come." "Maybe," Eleanor agreed. "But you'll be alive to tell them." The Wheelers packed with desperate efficiency, loading their wagon with whatever they could grab. Eleanor stood in the same spot the entire time, a bridge between two groups who wanted nothing more than to destroy each other. She could feel Thomas's hatred boring into her back, could see the fear and disgust on the Wheeler children's faces as they looked at her. When the wagon finally rolled away, "Mr. Wheeler turned back one last time. You're a traitor to your own kind," he called. The words should have stung, but Eleanor felt only exhaustion. Her own kind. What kind was that? The kind that had thrown her away, the kind that had left her to die. As soon as the wagon disappeared over the ridge, Thomas erupted. He stalked toward Eleanor, shouting in Apache. She caught words she knew: spy, betrayer, enemy. Others joined him, their earlier suspicions confirmed. She'd let the settlers go. She'd warned them. She'd stood between Apache arrows and white guns. Samuel moved to defend her, but Joseph held up his hand. The old leader approached Eleanor slowly, his face unreadable. "You let them go," he said in English. "You wanted them gone. They're gone. They will bring soldiers." "Maybe, or maybe they'll just find somewhere else to steal." She met his eyes steadily. "I did what you asked. I made them leave without bloodshed." "And if they return?" Eleanor thought of Mr. Wheeler's face, the humiliation and rage. "Then you do what you have to do. But today, no children died. No women became widows. No one started a war." Joseph studied her for a long moment. Then he turned and spoke to the band in Apache. His tone was measured, authoritative. Thomas argued, but Joseph cut him off sharply. Whatever he said, it was final. The warriors began to dismantle what the Wheelers had built, reclaiming the sacred space. The fallen trees couldn't be restored, but the half-built cabin was reduced to scattered lumber. The spring was cleaned of debris. Prayers were offered that Eleanor didn't understand but could feel in their solemnity. As the sun set, they made camp near the spring. Eleanor sat apart, exhausted by the day's tensions. She'd done what was asked, but she could feel how it had damaged her standing. She was useful but not trusted, necessary but not wanted. Samuel found her as darkness fell. He sat beside her without speaking for a while, then said, "You were brave today." "I was terrified." "Same thing sometimes." She looked at him. "Thomas hates me even more now." "Thomas hates everything that reminds him the world is changing. You cannot fix that." "And the others," Samuel considered, "they see you are not simple, not just white, not just Apache, something between." "Like you. Like me." He paused. "It is not easy, living between, but sometimes between is where bridges can be built." Eleanor thought about that as the camp settled for the night. She thought about standing between guns and arrows, between two worlds that couldn't understand each other. It wasn't a comfortable place to be, but maybe it was necessary. "The Wheelers," she said. "They'll tell everyone I've gone native, if any whites see me now." "Then you stay with us." "For how long?" Samuel turned to look at her fully. In the firelight, his eyes were dark and serious. "For as long as you choose, as long as we can protect you." It wasn't a declaration of love, not quite, but it was a promise. And from Samuel. Promises meant something. Eleanor felt the weight of the choice before her. She could try to leave, try to find her way back to the white world that had never wanted her. Or she could stay, caught between two peoples, belonging fully to neither, but perhaps carving out a small space in the margin between them. "I choose to stay," she said quietly. Samuel nodded, as if he'd expected nothing else. They sat together as the fire burned low. Two people who didn't quite fit anywhere but had found, in each other, someone who understood the particular loneliness of living between worlds. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The Wheelers might return with soldiers. Thomas might convince others she was dangerous. The fragile peace might shatter. But tonight, by the sacred spring under stars that didn't care about the boundaries humans drew, Eleanor had chosen her place. Difficult as it was, she would live between, building bridges where she could, even if those bridges were sometimes made of nothing more than hope and stubborn refusal to let hatred be the only answer. The morning mist clung to the valley like smoke, muffling sounds and blurring the edges of things. Eleanor woke with an uneasy feeling in her chest, the kind of premonition that comes from living too long on edges and margins. The camp was quieter than usual, the normal morning rhythms disrupted by something she couldn't name. Then she heard it, the low, mournful call of an owl in daylight. Wrong season, wrong time, a signal. Thomas appeared from the mist like a vengeful ghost, his hand rough on her arm as he hauled her to her feet. "You," he said in broken English. "You bring this—" Before she could ask what this was, she heard it, the distant thunder of hoofbeats. Many horses moving fast. The camp erupted into controlled chaos. Women grabbed children, men reached for weapons. Everything valuable was packed with practiced efficiency. "Soldiers?" Eleanor asked Samuel as he ran past. "No, worse. Settlers with rangers." His face was grim. "They know these hills." Joseph was already mounted, barking orders. The band would scatter women and children to the hidden canyon, warriors to defensive positions. But Thomas had other ideas. He dragged Eleanor to the center of camp, shouting in Apache. She caught enough words to understand he was accusing her of signaling their location, of betraying them to the Wheelers. "I didn't," she started, but Thomas backhanded her, sending her sprawling. Samuel was there instantly, knocking Thomas back. The two men grappled, but Joseph's voice cut through their fight. There was no time for this. The riders were getting closer. What happened next was so fast Eleanor could barely process it. The thunder of hooves became deafening. Men on horseback burst into the camp from multiple directions, not soldiers in uniform, but settlers and hired guns, their faces hard with righteous fury. She recognized Wheeler's red beard among them. Gunfire erupted. Apache arrows answered. The mist turned the battle into a nightmare of shadows and muzzle flashes. Eleanor tried to run, to find cover, but everywhere was chaos. She saw Maria fall, clutching her shoulder. She saw young James's mother pushing him behind a rock, terror on both their faces. A hand grabbed her hair, yanking her backward. "Got one," a voice shouted. "White woman, just like Wheeler said." She was dragged toward a horse, her feet scrambling for purchase. She glimpsed Samuel fighting two men at once, blood on his face. He saw her being taken, tried to break free, but more attackers pressed in. "No." Eleanor fought against the hands holding her, but the man was too strong. He threw her across his saddle like a sack of grain, her ribs slamming against the pommel. "Fall back," someone shouted. "We got what we came for." What Eleanor's confused mind tried to make sense of it. Then she understood they'd come for her. The Wheelers had told them about the white woman with the Apache, and they'd come to rescue her. The horse lurched into motion, and Eleanor caught one last glimpse of the camp shelters burning, bodies on the ground. Samuel breaking free and running after them, his face a mask of desperation. Then the horse crested the ridge, and everything she'd known for the past month vanished behind a wall of stone and distance. The ride was torture. Every bounce of the horse drove the saddle horn into her ribs, and the man's hand on her back kept her from adjusting position. They rode for what felt like hours before finally stopping at a crude camp, a collection of wagons and tents that served as a base for the ranger group. Eleanor was hauled off the horse and dumped unceremoniously on the ground. A circle of faces stared down at her, some curious, some disgusted, all seeing her as something alien. "Poor thing," a woman said. "Look what they've done to her. Dressed her up like one of them." "Been with them savages for weeks," another voice added. "No telling what she's been through. Eleanor tried to speak, to explain, but her ribs hurt and her mouth was full of dust. Someone brought water, forced her to drink. Hands pulled at her clothes, checking for injuries, assuming trauma where there was none. "I'm fine," she finally managed. "You don't understand." "Hush now," the first woman said. "You're safe now. Those heathens can't hurt you anymore." "They didn't hurt me. They saved—" The woman slapped her. "Not hard, but sharp enough to shock. That's the devil talking through you, girl. They've corrupted your mind. But don't worry, we'll fix you right up." Eleanor was dragged to a tent, her Apache clothes stripped away and burned despite her protests. She was forced into a dress that smelled of lie and righteousness, her hair yanked into a proper style that made her scalp ache. Through it all, she could hear the men outside planning their next move. "Trail's still warm. We could track them to their hideout." "Too dangerous, but we bloodied them good. They'll think twice before raiding again." Raiding Eleanor wanted to scream. The Apache hadn't raided anything. They'd been defending their sacred place, their camp, their families. But she knew these people wouldn't listen, wouldn't care about the truth. She was tied to a wagon wheel that night, for her own good, they said, to keep her from running back to her captors in her confused state. The rope bit into her wrists as she tested it, finding no give. Above her, stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to human suffering. Eleanor dozed fitfully, jerking awake each time she heard a sound that might be rescue, but no one came. Dawn brought only more righteous faces, more plans to save her. "We'll take her to Fort Benton." Wheeler decided he'd assumed leadership of her fate, perhaps feeling responsible since he'd identified her. "There's a minister there. Runs a home for reformed women. They'll know how to handle her situation." A home for reformed women. Eleanor knew what that meant: locked doors, Bible readings, scrubbing floors until your hands bled, all to wash away sins you hadn't committed. She'd seen such places in her orphan train days. They loaded her into a wagon, tied her hands to the bench, just as a precaution. The ranger group dispersed, some heading back to their farms, others riding patrol. Only Wheeler and 2 other men would take her to the fort. The journey was 3 days of jolting misery. Eleanor tried several times to explain, to make them understand that she'd been with the Apache by choice, that they'd saved her life. But every word was dismissed as evidence of her mental corruption. "Stockholm Syndrome," one of the men said knowingly, though Eleanor doubted he knew what the words meant. "Happens to captives. They start thinking their captors are friends." On the second night, they camped near a stream. Eleanor was allowed to wash her face, though a rope around her waist kept her from running. As she knelt by the water, she saw her reflection and barely recognized herself. The white woman's dress, the pinned hair, the defeated slope of her shoulders. She looked like she had before, when she'd walked behind the Bickley wagon, like nothing and no one. But then she saw something else in the water, a shadow moving through the trees on the opposite bank. Her heart leaped. Samuel. Had he found her? She forced herself not to look directly, not to give anything away, but hope bloomed in her chest for the first time since her capture. That night, she lay awake, every nerve strung tight. The men took turns on watch, but they were overconfident, sure that no Apache would dare attack this close to the fort. The man currently on duty, Henderson, she'd heard him called, was half dozing against a tree. A hand covered her mouth, and she nearly cried out before recognizing the touch. Samuel. He'd come. His knife sliced through her bonds without a sound, and he helped her to her feet. They moved like shadows, each step careful, measured, silent. They'd almost reached the tree line when Henderson shifted, his eyes opening, for a heartbeat. Nobody moved. Then Henderson opened his mouth to shout, and Samuel was on him, hand over his mouth, knife at his throat, not cutting, just pressing enough to make the threat clear. Eleanor grabbed Henderson's rifle, though her hands shook. "Don't," she whispered. "Please don't make him hurt you." Henderson's eyes were wide with terror. darting between her and Samuel. Finally! He nodded slightly. Samuel eased his hand away. Traitor, Henderson spat quietly. You're choosing them over your own kind. My own kind left me to die, Eleanor replied. They chose to save me. The choice was already made. Samuel tied and gagged Henderson with efficient movements, then pulled Eleanor toward the trees. They ran through the darkness, branches catching at her dress, stones cutting her bare feet. Behind them, she heard Henderson's muffled attempts to raise alarm, but they were already too far away. Samuel had brought a horse, hidden in a grove a mile from the camp. He lifted her onto it, swung up behind her, and they rode hard into the night. Eleanor pressed back against him, feeling his solid warmth, his arm secure around her waist. The others, she asked when they finally slowed. Scattered, some hurt, some killed. Maria lives. James and his mother got away. His voice was tight with controlled emotion. Thomas died fighting. Eleanor felt a complicated mix of emotions at that news. Thomas had hated her, but he'd died defending his people. I'm sorry. He died as a warrior. It's what he wanted. Samuel paused. Joseph says you weren't to blame. Says the whites would have come anyway. Eventually. But they came for me. To save me. You didn't ask to be saved. They rode through the rest of the night, Samuel taking paths that seemed invisible to Eleanor, but that he navigated with certainty. As dawn broke, they stopped at a hidden spring to rest and water the horse. Eleanor looked at him properly for the first time since her rescue. There was a cut on his cheek, bruising around one eye. Blood stained his shirt. You're hurt. I'll heal. She tore strips from the hem of the white woman's dress, wet them in the spring, and cleaned his wounds despite his protests. Her hands were gentle but sure, and he gradually relaxed under her touch. You came for me, she said quietly. Always, he replied, catching her hand in his. As long as I breathe, you won't be lost. The words were similar to what he'd said before, but now they carried more weight. He'd risked everything to find her, to bring her back. Not back to the Apache camp that was gone now, scattered to the winds, but back to him, to the space they'd carved out between worlds. What now? She asked. Where do we go? There's a place, Samuel said. Hidden Valley, 3 days north. Others will gather there, those who survived, those who still want to fight. And us. He looked at her, his dark eyes serious. We decide together. Eleanor nodded, understanding. They were both outlaws now, fully belonging to neither world. She'd made her choice when she'd helped him escape from Henderson. He'd made his when he'd come for her. Whatever came next, they would face it together. As they mounted the horse again, Eleanor took one last look at the dress she'd torn for bandages. White fabric, stained now with blood and dirt. She felt no regret leaving that world behind again. It had never been hers anyway. They rode toward the hidden valley, toward uncertainty, toward a future that promised no safety but offered something more valuable choice. The freedom to define themselves, to live in the margins, to build something new from the fragments of two worlds that would never fully accept them. Behind them, the sun rose over the abandoned camp, and somewhere, Henderson was probably free by now. Raising the alarm. There would be pursuit, consequences, danger. But for now, for this moment, Eleanor was exactly where she chose to be, riding toward an uncertain dawn with the one person who'd seen her truly and decided she was worth saving. The hidden valley was a sanctuary carved by ancient waters, its entrance concealed by a fall of rocks that looked impassable until you knew the secret path. Samuel led the horse through the narrow passage, Eleanor ducking low against his back to avoid the overhanging stones. When they emerged on the other side, she gasped. The valley opened into a bowl of green grass and cottonwoods, fed by a spring that bubbled from the rocks. Smoke rose from several fires, and she could see familiar figures moving among temporary shelters. They'd made it. Some of them. At least, Maria was the first to see them, her arm bound in a sling but her eyes sharp. She called out, and others emerged, perhaps 15 survivors from a band that had numbered 30. Joseph stood near the central fire, his weathered face showing relief as Samuel helped Eleanor down from the horse. "So," the elder said in English, "they could not keep you." "Samuel came for me," Eleanor said simply. Yes, he would not wait, would not listen to reason. But there was approval in Joseph's tone. "You are here now. That is what matters." The reunion was subdued. Too many faces were missing. Too much had been lost. Eleanor learned the full cost of the raid: 6 dead, including Thomas, several wounded, their supplies scattered or destroyed. The survivors had grabbed what they could and fled to this predetermined gathering place. She tried to help where she could, tending wounds with Maria's guidance, gathering firewood, preparing what little food they had, but she could feel the weight of unspoken questions. Had she brought this disaster? Would there be more violence because of her? That night, as they sat around the fire eating thin soup made from roots and dried meat, a scout returned with troubling news. The army was mobilizing, searching for the kidnapped white woman and the renegade Apache who'd taken her. Patrols were sweeping the hills. Rewards had been posted. "We cannot stay here," Joseph announced. "Too close, too dangerous. We go north, into the mountains. Winter comes early there, but we will be harder to find. The woman slows us down." Someone said Patricia, Thomas's widow. Her grief had hardened into anger, and she looked at Eleanor with undisguised hatred. "She stays," Samuel said firmly. "You would risk all of us for her," Patricia demanded. Before Samuel could answer, Eleanor stood. "No, she's right. I'm a danger to everyone. You should nothing," Samuel interrupted, standing as well. "You are one of us now. We do not abandon our own." "But I'm not." "You are..." Joseph's voice cut through the argument. "You made your choice when you stood between us and the settlers' guns. Samuel made his when he brought you here. It is decided." Patricia turned away, but Eleanor caught her whispered words. "Thomas was right about her." They prepared through the night for the journey north. Everything non-essential was left behind or hidden. Eleanor traded the torn white dress for Apache clothing, practical leather and cloth that would hold up to hard travel. She helped pack medical supplies, knowing they might need them if anyone's wounds worsened during the journey. Just before dawn, as they were loading the last horses, riders appeared at the valley's entrance. Eleanor's heart stopped. Had they been found already? But then she recognized the lead rider. It was Michael, one of the scouts who'd been away during the raid, and with him were 3 other Apaches she didn't know. "The army has roadblocks on all the main passes," Michael reported. "But I know another way. Harder, longer, but hidden." They left as the sun touched the valley rim. A ragged line of riders and walkers, wounded and whole, old and young. Eleanor rode with Samuel, his presence behind her a constant reassurance. The path Michael led them on was barely a deer track, winding up into the mountains through stands of pine and aspen. By midday, they could see smoke in the distance, their valley, burning. The army had found it, though too late. Eleanor felt Samuel tense behind her, his arm tightening around her waist. "Just trees and grass," she said softly. "We're safe." For now. They climbed higher as the day wore on, the air growing thinner and cooler. Some of the wounded struggled, and they had to stop frequently to rest. During one such stop, Eleanor found herself sitting with James, the boy whose knees she'd bandaged so long ago. "Are you really going to stay with us?" he asked in careful English. "If you'll have me." "Samuel wants you to stay." "And you?" James considered this seriously. "You helped me when I was hurt, and you tried to stop the fighting. Mother says that makes you complicated." Eleanor almost laughed. That's one word for it. As they prepared to move again, she noticed Patricia watching her, eyes full of accusation. The woman said something to another warrior, who looked at Eleanor and nodded. A cold dread settled in her stomach. Samuel noticed too, his hand moving subtly to his knife. They made camp that night in a grove of pines. No fires allowed this close to pursuit. Everyone huddled together for warmth except Eleanor and Samuel, who sat slightly apart, backs against a fallen log. Patricia blames me, Eleanor said quietly. Patricia needs someone to blame. Thomas chose to fight. He died fighting. It was his way. But if I hadn't been there, then the raid would have happened anyway. Eventually, the whites want the land. They always have. You're just an excuse. They sat in comfortable silence, sharing body heat as the mountain night grew cold. Eleanor dozed, her head on Samuel's shoulder, feeling safer than she had any right to feel. She woke to commotion, lights moving below them, torches, many of them following their trail. The army had found their path somehow. Joseph was already organizing the healthy would lead the pursuers away, while the wounded and children escaped higher into the mountains. I should go down, Eleanor said suddenly. If I turn myself in, tell them I escaped, they might— No, Samuel's response was immediate and fierce. We stay together. But— He turned her to face him, his hands on her shoulders. Eleanor, no. The way he said her name, rare and deliberate, stopped her protest. Behind them, the band was splitting. Michael would lead the decoy group, making obvious trail down a parallel valley. Joseph would take the others higher, into territories even the Apache rarely ventured. They climbed through the night, a desperate scramble over rocks and through streams meant to break their trail. Eleanor's hands were cut and bleeding by dawn, her clothes torn by branches and thorns, but they'd gained distance on their pursuers. As the sun rose, they crested a ridge and sought a hidden canyon, deeper and more sheltered than their valley, with caves in its walls and a stream running through its heart. It was cold here, patches of old snow lingering in shadows, but it was sanctuary. Home, Joseph said wearily. For now. They spent the day establishing camp in the largest cave, tending wounds, taking inventory of their supplies. It wasn't much, perhaps a week's food if carefully rationed. Some weapons, medical supplies Eleanor had packed. Winter was coming, and they were poorly prepared. That evening, as Eleanor helped Maria prepare a meal from their meager stores, the older woman spoke unexpectedly. Thomas was my cousin, she said in her accented English. I grieved when he died. Eleanor stayed silent, knowing there was more. But, Maria continued, he was also wrong. About you. You've chosen hard path, living between worlds. It brings pain. I know. Do you? Maria looked at her directly. Samuel walks that path too, has walked it since the mission school. It makes him strong, but also alone. Not alone anymore, Eleanor said softly. Maria almost smiled. No, not alone. That night, the temperature dropped dramatically. Snow began to fall, heavy and steady. The band huddled in the cave, sharing warmth and worry. Their food wouldn't last. The wounded needed better care than they could provide. The children were frightened. Eleanor lay next to Samuel, their bodies pressed close for warmth under shared blankets. Around them, others did the same. Survival overcoming propriety. What are you thinking? Samuel asked quietly. That I've brought you nothing but trouble. You've brought me yourself. That's not trouble. She turned to face him in the darkness. Samuel? Listen, he said. Tomorrow, Michael returns, maybe with the others, maybe with news. Either way, we survive. We always have. And if the army finds us here, then we fight, or run, or negotiate. But we do it together. Together. The word hung between them, heavy with promise and uncertainty. Eleanor reached up, touched the cut on his cheek that was finally healing. He caught her hand, pressed it to his lips, a gesture so tender it made her chest ache.
"I love you,"
she whispered, the words escaping before she could stop them. He was quiet for so long she thought he might not respond. Then, in my language, we say shinia. It means, you are my life. It's stronger than love. It's recognition that you are essential, like breath. Shinia, she repeated carefully. Yes, he said, you are that to me. They held each other as the snow fell harder, sealing them into their mountain refuge. Outside, the world searched for them with guns and anger. But inside, in this moment, they had each other and the fragile hope that love might be enough to bridge the impossible distance between their worlds. Tomorrow would bring whatever it brought, rescue or capture, survival or loss. But tonight, in a cave high in the mountains, two people who belonged nowhere found they belonged to each other, and that was its own kind of home. The fire died to embers, the snow kept falling, and in the darkness, surrounded by the breathing of survivors, Eleanor and Samuel held tight to each other and to the choice they'd made to stand together in the space between worlds, no matter the cost. The snow had stopped by morning, leaving the world transformed into pristine white silence. Eleanor woke to find Samuel already gone, his warmth replaced by cold air. She found him at the cave mouth, watching the pristine valley below with Michael, who had returned during the night with troubling news. The army pulled back, Michael reported. But not gone. They're waiting at the base of the mountains. Every pass is watched. Joseph joined them, his face grave as he considered their options. They couldn't stay here through winter, not enough food, not enough shelter for everyone. But leaving meant almost certain capture. There is another way, Michael said hesitantly. The old treaty grounds at Stone Creek. Some bands still camp there legally. If we could reach them. 3 days through open country, Joseph mused, with wounded and children. Eleanor listened, an idea forming. What if you didn't all go together? The men turned to her, and she continued. The army is looking for a war band with a white woman captive. If I went separately, made myself visible elsewhere, it might draw them away. No, Samuel said immediately. Listen, Eleanor pressed on. I could go down the Eastern Trail with 1 or 2 people, let myself be rescued. Tell them I escaped, that the band went west. Meanwhile, you take everyone north to Stone Creek. Joseph was considering it. She could tell it made tactical sense, but Samuel's face was stone. It could work, Joseph said slowly. It won't happen, Samuel stated flatly. That afternoon, while the others prepared for whatever came next, Samuel led Eleanor to a sheltered spot where sun had melted the snow. They sat on a fallen log, the valley spreading below them. You would sacrifice yourself for us. He said it wasn't a question. It's not sacrifice if it saves everyone. And what about us, what we have? Eleanor took his hand. What we have is why I would do it, to give us a chance at a future, even if— Stop! His voice was rough. We find another way. They sat in silence, hands clasped, watching eagles circle in the blue distance. Finally, Eleanor spoke again. Tell me about the mission school. Samuel was quiet for a long moment. I was 8 when they took me. Said they would civilize me, save my soul. They cut my hair, burned my clothes, beat me when I spoke Apache. His grip on her hand tightened. For 5 years, I was Samuel, the good Christian boy. Then they sent me back, expecting me to convert my people. But you didn't. I couldn't be what they wanted, but I couldn't forget what they taught either. Reading, writing, their language, it was in me now. Couldn't be removed. He looked at her. Like you're in me now. Part of me. Can't be removed. That evening, as they shared their meager meal, a sentry's whistle announced visitors. Everyone tensed, weapons appearing in hands, but the figures who emerged from the twilight weren't soldiers. It was a small group of Apache from another band, led by an elderly woman Eleanor had never seen before. She spoke rapidly with Joseph, gesturing toward the east. Eleanor caught fragments, something about a gathering, a council, an opportunity. Joseph translated for Eleanor and the others who'd been to mission school. There's to be a peace council at Fort Benton in 3 days. Several bands are going, trying to negotiate winter territories. The army has promised safe passage. It's a trap, Patricia said immediately. Maybe, Joseph agreed. But if we arrived as peaceful families seeking to join the council. The debate continued late into the night. Trust the army's word, risk exposure, or stay hidden and slowly starve. Eleanor watched Samuel's face in the firelight, seeing him weigh impossible choices. Finally, Joseph decided they would go, but carefully. Scouts would ride ahead. At the first sign of betrayal, they would scatter. And Eleanor would be presented not as a captive, but as Samuel's wife, choosing to live with the Apache. Wife, Eleanor said, startled. It provides legal protection. Joseph explained. They cannot force a wife from her husband without cause. Samuel looked at her, a question in his eyes. She nodded slowly. It was protection, but also truth, in every way that mattered. They prepared through the night. Eleanor helped Maria create more conventional clothing from their supplies they needed to look like peaceful families, not a war band. She bound wounds that needed to stay hidden, distributed their remaining food, helped calm frightened children. As dawn approached, Samuel found her by the spring, washing trail dust from her face. After this, he said, whatever happens, we leave. Leave. North, maybe Canada, or south to Mexico. Somewhere we can be ourselves without armies and treaties and councils. He pulled her close. Just us. That sounds like a dream. Then we make it real. The journey to Fort Benton took 2 days of careful travel. They moved like families migrating, not warriors. Eleanor rode beside Samuel, Maria and her children behind them, Joseph leading with dignity despite his exhaustion. As the fort came into view, Eleanor's stomach clenched. Soldiers everywhere. Other Apache bands already gathered, white officials in dark suits watching everything. This could go wrong so many ways. They were stopped at the gate, soldiers examining them with suspicious eyes. One officer studied Eleanor particularly. Ma'am, are you here of your own free will? I am, she said clearly. You're Samuel's woman, the one from the mission school. Samuel nodded. My wife. The officer looked skeptical but had no grounds to challenge it. They were allowed in, directed to where other bands had set up temporary camps. The council itself was theater. Officials made grand speeches about peace and cooperation while offering territories that were too small, too barren, too far from traditional grounds. The Apache leaders responded with patience Eleanor couldn't fathom, negotiating for every stream, every valley, every sacred site. On the second day, Eleanor recognized someone in the crowd of observers, Mr. Wheeler, his red beard unmistakable. His eyes found her, widened in recognition. She saw him turn to a soldier, pointing. Trouble, she whispered to Samuel. Within an hour, they were summoned to the commander's office. Colonel Morrison, a man with cold eyes and perfectly waxed mustache, studied them across his desk. Mr. Wheeler claims this woman was kidnapped from a wagon train, held against her will. He's mistaken, Samuel said evenly. Eleanor is my wife. Can she speak for herself? The colonel addressed Eleanor. Are you here willingly? I am. And you married this man of your own free will? I chose him. He chose me. She met the colonel's eyes steadily. That's what marriage is, isn't it? Wheeler burst in then, face red with indignation. She's been brainwashed. She stood against her own kind. Hey, Mr. Wheeler. The colonel cut him off. The lady has spoken. He looked back at Eleanor and Samuel. However, I'll need to see documentation. Marriage certificate, mission records, something official. They had nothing, of course. Samuel started to speak, but Eleanor stood. Colonel Morrison, may I speak freely? He nodded, curious despite himself. I was abandoned by a wagon train to die in the desert. No one came back for me. No one searched. I was nobody orphan train trash. Hired help, disposable. Her voice grew stronger. Samuel found me dying and saved me. His people took me in when my own people threw me away. So yes, I chose him. I chose them. And if that disturbs Mr. Wheeler's sense of proper order, perhaps he should have thought of that before leaving me to die. The room was silent. Wheeler's face had gone from red to white. The colonel leaned back, studying them all. I have no legal grounds to separate a wife from her husband, he finally said. However, he looked at Samuel. Your band will be assigned to the reservation at Crow Creek. You'll report there within the month. Crow Creek. Eleanor had heard of it, barren land. Far from here, far from anything. But it was together. They could be together. They left the office, Wheeler's curses following them. The council continued for another day. More bands accepting reservations they didn't want, territories that weren't home. But survival demanded adaptation, as Samuel said. On their last night at the fort, the various bands held a gathering. Stories were told, songs sung quietly enough not to disturb the soldiers. Eleanor sat with the women, finally accepted if not fully embraced. James fell asleep against her shoulder, his mother nodding approval. You did well today, Maria told her, spoke truth with strength. Joseph approached as the gathering wound down. The reservation, he said to Samuel and Eleanor. It's not what we wanted, but it's land they'll leave us on. For now. For now, Samuel agreed. And you two? Eleanor and Samuel looked at each other. We'll come, Samuel said. Help get everyone settled, but after, you find your own path. Joseph finished. I understand. As they prepared to leave the fort, heading toward their assigned reservation, Eleanor took one last look back. The American flag snapped in the morning breeze above walls that represented everything that had rejected her. But she felt no regret, no longing for that world. Samuel helped her mount their horse, swung up behind her. His arms came around her, holding the reins but also holding her. Regrets, he asked quietly. None. You. How can I regret the path that brought me you? They rode out with their band, their family now, toward a reservation that would be another kind of challenge. There would be struggle ahead. Eleanor knew. The government would try to change them, civilize them. Settlers would still encroach. The world was changing faster than anyone could adapt. But she had chosen her place in that changing world. Not white, not Apache, but something in between, something new. With Samuel, she would navigate that space, build something from it. Look, Samuel said, pointing ahead. The sun was breaking through clouds, sending shafts of light across the prairie. The grass turned gold, the sky infinite blue. Behind them lay everything they'd survived. Ahead waited uncertainty, but also possibility. It's beautiful, Eleanor said. Nijoni, Samuel replied, balanced in harmony. Are we in harmony? He pressed a kiss to her temple. We are now. As they rode toward their uncertain future, Eleanor thought about homes, all the ones she'd never had, the ones she'd thought she'd never find. Home wasn't the reservation they were heading to. It wasn't the valleys they'd left behind. It was this Samuel's arms around her, their people riding beside them, the choice to face whatever came together. You are my home now, she said, echoing words that had once seemed impossible. And you are mine, he replied. Shinya, you are my life. The band crested a hill. Spread out below was the vast prairie, and somewhere beyond that, their new beginning. It wouldn't be easy. Love between worlds never was. But it was theirs, chosen and fought for, and that made it worth everything they'd survived to find it. In the distance, an eagle cried wild and free, and Eleanor smiled. They too would find their freedom, in time, together. Thank you for listening to this story of love and survival in the American frontier. If you enjoyed Eleanor and Samuel's journey, please let us know where you're listening from. We love connecting with our audience around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about this tale of two people finding home in each other against all odds. Your comments mean everything to us.